So when they were arrested by US forces and immediately taken off to warships, US warships, where they were allegedly held in situations that would amount to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, such as they were put into metal boxes and held on the decks of ships or very near the engine room, so that there was deafening noise, that the heat would have been absolutely stifling, and this went on for a good few days. They were constantly interrogated, and they were, most importantly, were allowed no access to the outside world. No one knew where they were, so it was incommunicado detention. They had no access to the courts, to legal advice, to legal representation during interrogation. So clearly in violation of numerous international laws, very similar to the treatment meted out to some of the detainees in Guantanamo Bay.
News was coming out of Grenada very fast, and so on. And some of the people that were arrested were later released. So we knew from them very much what was taking place.
When I heard about the invasion, it was a terribly painful experience. I mean, first we had the news about Morris being killed, and then we heard about the Americans invading, and we didn't know what was happening to people, and I was totally distraught really about the whole thing. At first a lot of people didn't really know what to do at all, although fairly quickly afterwards a group was organised to go down and investigate what happened, which was actually led by Bernie Grant, the MP, which we led support to, and it was from that the Committee for Human Rights in Grenada developed.
And so, a campaign was established straight away by our High Commissioner, Bannister Gustin, and lots of people got involved, people like the late Bernie Grant, some dead people actually. All gone now, but Bernie Grant was very active, and there's people like Jeremy Corbyn and lots of grassroots organisations.
From the very beginning, I think the very Sunday after the invasion, I was the organiser of a demonstration from Shepherd's Bush Green to the High Commission or Scoot. The view we held was that there should be a proper inquiry, and those found responsible should be punished.
Yes, okay, it was awful, it was tragic, people we loved and cared about were dead. But at the same time, we had an immediate issue, which people we also loved and cared about were about to be strung up, because, that was the echo of the Americans and also of Grenadian elites and right-wing forces in the Caribbean, like Eugenia Charles and Tom Adams and Edward Seaga. We could see straight away there was going to be a kangaroo trial and that they were going to be executed.
The original trial was full of gross irregularities. For one thing, the court itself had been deemed unconstitutional and then was deemed it should go ahead because it was a court of necessity. No such thing exists under international law or domestic law. The 17 were not given legal representation until quite a long time after their incarceration, when you should have legal representation from the very beginning. There was the situation of the confessions that they allegedly gave that may have been obtained under torture. During the trial, they weren't legally represented. That's a violation of international law. They should have had lawyers there. The jury was not put together in an appropriate manner. And so on and so on. When you read the trial transcript, it's quite shocking.
I visited Grenada just before the case started, at a time when they were still recruiting jurors. And one of them said to me, these people should not receive any trial at all. What should happen is that they should have been thrown into a tank of sharks, and those who survived are innocent.
The whole trial was a gross impropriety. I mean, in all my years of experience as a practicing solicitor, I have never seen so many irregularities and improprieties in one case. I would describe it as a total travesty of justice. Really appalling.
The 3 soldiers were found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 45 years in prison each. The rest of the prisoners, the alleged conspirators, were all found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. A lengthy appeal was unsuccessful and all the sentences were confirmed. 14 of the prisoners were now set to hang.
Civil society, etc., in Grenada was in terrible chaos, and the United States, similar to what it's doing in Iraq now, funded the country. So the Court of Appeal, the original trial court, all the judges, all the juries would have been funded by a grant from the United States, as we understand it. What's worrying about that is had the 17 been found innocent, that would have been very, very embarrassing for the US authorities. Ronald Reagan had justified this invasion of Grenada by saying the country was being run by thugs who had committed murder, etc. Had they been cleared, it would have been embarrassing for the US authorities. So it's clearly in the interests of the United States that a conviction was obtained.
I think the lowest point was the announcement of the death sentence. Somebody rang me and told me that they've been found guilty and it's a sentence of death. There was just, I can't explain that really.
We thought they were going to be hanged. I mean, they were erecting the gallows in the prison. They were measuring them up for their hanging suits. 4 of them were in death cells and within days of being hanged. And all of us in the committee were just desperately rushing around, doing everything we possibly could to try to save them. We did quite a lot of television broadcasts. We were picketing outside the Grenada High Commission. We were picketing outside the Privy Council building in Whitehall. We were doing absolutely everything that we could.
My son was only about 2 at the time, and we would go out campaigning. We would write as many letters as possible, fax people, so on and so forth, and that was just so harrowing to think that they actually could be hung on no evidence.
Once they lost the appeal and the death penalty was passed on and they were going to carry those sentences out, the bulk of the campaign was around getting the death sentences commuted. It was relatively easy to get certain politicians that would not touch the campaign to publish. So people like Edward Heath, were coming out and sort of saying it shouldn't happen or whatever. And I think really the Americans were pushing very strongly for that to happen because that would have drawn a line under it.
At the time, I didn't think we could stop it. I didn't think anybody could stop it, really. I thought we were up against the most powerful organisation in the world, the US State Department. They are dictating and directing this show.
The international campaign against the death sentences included people who believed the prisoners guilty as well as those who thought them innocent. The campaign succeeded and the death sentences were eventually overturned. But Grenadian law has no equivalent of a life sentence. With a murder charge, you are either innocent or executed. Despite a constitutional limit of 15 years for sentences, the prisoners languish in a legal limbo of apparently permanent confinement. Over the years, the campaign for their release has become bogged down in legal bureaucracy. As Grenada is a former British colony and a Commonwealth member, the prisoners have the right of appeal to the UK's Privy Council. Yet local courts have repeatedly blocked this route. For many years, a majority of islanders opposed release, believing all 17 to be guilty. Their supporters have suggested that both the American and the Grenadian authorities want the 17 forgotten.